Welcome to WiscoDice!
Hey, yo, folks. I'm your host, the Cozy with the Most, and I'm joined today by...
Hello, everyone. It is I, the Meeples Champion.
And I'm Matt, the Ghost Walker.
And I'm Suzanne.
And this is episode 138 of the WiscoDice Tabletop Gaming Podcast. Today is February 26, 2025, and on today's episode, we're going to cover our review of one of 2024's hottest releases and the Meeples Champion Game of the Year, Andromeda's Edge. But first, let's roll into what games we have been playing. And that first game that we've been playing is going to be SETI, the Search for Extra-Terrestrial Intelligence from CGE. This game takes, probably 40 minutes or so a player and plays 1 to 4 players. What you're doing is the game basically goes over 5 total rounds where you're going to be getting cards and you're going to be using those to do actions, to do things like scan this solar system for various signals, or perhaps you're going to send probes out into the solar system and try to get those probes to land on planets or satellite and orbit planets where you can get samples and do additional studies. Or perhaps you're going to do activities that'll have to try to get funding or get fame so that you can get better funding to be able to do other things. There's all sorts of different things that you can do in this game. I can say personally, when I played it, I could say it has a lot of vibes from a game that CGE made that was really popular and is still very popular, and that is Lost Ruins of Arnak, while still being a very, 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 and I want to emphasize, very unique game here. One of the things that's worth noting is that the game does come with 5 different alien species that ultimately get unlocked during the game, but you only unlock up to 2 of them in any single game. This gives you a great chance of getting something new or unique every time you play the game, and you don't know when you're playing the game which 2 alien species you're going to have in the game. So it definitely, you can't necessarily plan a strategy or figure anything out until you get to a point that you start seeing and you flip over those alien tiles and go, oh, okay, yay, I know what that one's going to maybe do, or what kind of cards or what kind of things I can do to maybe maximize my stuff off of that. So I feel like it's a great little mechanic about midway through the game that you're like discovering while you're playing the game. And hopefully, fingers crossed, CGE will put out more alien factions for the game in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I did play this one once with Cozy, so we did as a 2-player game, and I've seen several different groups of people playing it at some conventions and meetups and everything. It's a lot of fun, and those aliens being discovered midway through the game just give you that extra little boost to keep going. Without it, I think the game would just kind of feel like, oh, we're done, we've explored everything. This is just that next push to explore a little further out into space.
Yeah, it changes things up quite a bit, and the game itself, when it's on the table, it looks very pretty, but also oh my goodness, what in the world is going on? There is so much stuff in that box, and so many things. Like, you're actually spinning planets and orbiting things. The planets, the solar system is actually moving on the game board while you're playing, while you're doing things, which you can take advantage of when you're like sending your probes out into space to maybe, have them take advantage of a nice rotation when you can to get them to go further where you need them to go.
Yeah, so there's so much on there that this game is going to help me fulfill one of my 2025 gaming resolutions, because it's screaming for a nice organizer. And so I will be making or finding an organizer for this game. But it looks like a lot, but it's one of those games that once you actually start playing it, it's not too much. There's just lots of different places to go. So, yeah, you just got to make sure you got some table space for it.
Yeah, so definitely need some table space. So with that, why don't we roll into our next game? Trajan, I think it is, isn't it?
Yep. So our next one, we are resurrecting a game that was published way back in 2011. So this was published by Ammonit Spiele and reprinted in the US by Renegade Games. This is Trajan. This is a game that can play up to 4 players. I think everyone here has on the podcast and the show has played it at least once. Some of us, it's been a little bit longer than others because, like I said, it's been out for a while. Conesy and I had this on our looking for player shelf, and as bringing back my one of my resolutions is to get everything played that's on the looking for players table right now. So this one came out and I got to play for my first time, and I had a blast with it. It is a classic Stefan-Feld Euro game that we've gotten out, and it has a lot of deep strategy, and it's a game that's set in ancient Rome. So you're competing to gain influence through politics, military expansion, trade, cultural development. So it's just got kind of a lot of different areas going on, ways that you're building it up. What I find that really sets Trajan apart is it's somewhat unique, maybe not as unique as it was when it came out though, but Mancala style action selection that you have. So each turn, you're moving these colored action markers around your personal rondel, and then where the last one is placed determines what actions you can take. And they're also trying to, at the same time, set yourself up for powerful bonus moves if the colors in that Mancala like bowl meet the colors that are on your Trajan tile that you have there. So it gives you some extra moves, extra actions in the game. It's definitely a game of efficiency and long-term planning, which is something I struggle with in games. And of course, it's got what everyone knows and loves from Stefan-Feld games is the point salad scoring that comes with it. There is very little luck involved in this. I feel like it's a very crunchy Euro experience that, you know, if you're careful and plan it out, that you're going to get rewarded. And I enjoy heavier games, and I want to get better at playing ahead. So this is one that I will continue playing this year, and I suggest you check it out too if you like that.
Yeah, Trajan's a lot of fun. And you're right, it's kind of that first game that had that Mancala mechanism kind of started into it that kind of got on the table. And I remember a friend of mine getting this game, and Justin, you probably remember this as well because you were probably drugged through a few of these plays too. But when back in the day when we were in our like original discovery of board games, when this game got discovered, I swear it must have been on the table every week for 5 or 6 weeks, just nonstop, at least once a week. And I don't think anybody complained. Nobody was like, oh, that game again. It was, yeah, that game again. We were all excited to play it. And so I remembered it being a really good game, and we picked it up, a year or two ago to add it to our collection. And it just kind of sat there. And I was like, kept like, new games keep coming out. I've deprioritized it. Well, now that we prioritized and got it to the table, not only has it got to the table, but Matt got to play it. Mm-hmm. And then people that were at the table playing with Matt, at least one of them went out and bought it right away after that play because they had such a good time. So, yeah, this is a sign of a good game is when other people that get introduced to it want to turn around and buy it.
Yeah. I had a good time. I mean, it was my first time ever playing it or seeing it. I mean, I don't think it's like compared to, say, more modern games, doesn't have a crazy table presence, but I was just drawn in by the Mancala thing, just trying to figure out, like, how do you optimize your turn and, like, what am I trying to get done and what do I pick up and how do I place it perfectly so that I can get all this extra stuff. And it was a lot of fun trying to, like, work out that deep brain puzzle and think ahead, because while other people you don't have huge interactions with other people, they can absolutely steal the space you wanted, or, you know, they get to it before you do, and suddenly you have to replan and go a different direction. So There was a bit of that sort of tit for tat going on the board too. So, I mean, that's the nice thing is it's got a little bit of everything built in, and it does require a good bit of thinking ahead.
Nothing like that classic early 2000s crunchy Euro design, graphics design for a board game.
Graphic design aside, it's a very elegant game.
It is.
And the design works for it. I mean,
yeah, it holds up. Like that's one of the things, like so many games that were of that generation that were incorporating design concepts that nobody had seen before or really had seen like implemented like that before in a board game, were hitting the tables, and a lot of them they did really well because they were ahead of the curve during the time. And I feel like this is one that really holds up well, even though it's currently, I think, out of print everywhere. So, but you can get a used copy pretty easy, I think, still at like Noble Knight and other used game places.
Right. Yeah.
But,
Justin, do you remember playing this one when it first came out?
It has been a long time. I remember the Mancala being a pretty unique aspect to it, but it's been way too long for me to say anything cogent about sure.
The Mancala stood out in your head.
Yeah, no, for sure. It was very unique at the time, and yeah, it was during that sort of time of discovery of new mechanics and new games, and this one definitely stood out. I would like to try it again sometime soon.
Well, anytime I'm up for a game. So,
yeah.
But anyway, that was Trajan, designed by Stefan Feld.
Check out WiscoDice.com for the links to the games we discussed. And while you're at it, please leave a review of this podcast wherever you download podcasts.
Do it now.
And do it now.
All right. Well, why don't we go ahead and roll into our main topic for today, which I'm very excited to talk about, and that is Andromeda's Edge and our review of this game. Andromeda's Edge, which you probably heard about if you listened to our episode when we wrapped up and we did our end of the year game awards. You should have heard the Meeples Champ give it to his 2024 Game of the Year, which is saying something because I think last year there were a lot of really good games to compare it. I mean, there was a Lacerda game that came out the same year.
Mm-hmm.
But in this game, you're on the edge of the Andromeda galaxy and you're playing a faction that is asymmetric. It's unique. It's an alien species that is basically been driven from the rest of whatever the civilized world, and you're trying to reestablish effectively. That's the way I understand the theme of this game anyways. And you're going to be developing your empire by sending out ships and upgrading and getting new ships and having space battles and advancing on a bunch of tracks and whatnot. But I think that's enough from me basically telling you a gist of what this game's like. Why don't we get into the components and the aesthetics of this game? Suzanne, you want to kick that off?
Sure. So one thing to note is that the copy that both copies that I've played have been the deluxe version of Andromeda's Edge. So when I'm talking about some of the components, I'm referencing those. There's a few differences, I believe, with the base. But the first thing that stood out to me was, like, overall was the component quality. To me, it was top tier. The ice, the nanocarbon, and the credits are, like, particularly impressive to me. So there's just, like, this a little bit of shine and this tactile feel with them. Like, the ice almost feels like it's cold and it's got the little, crisp edges on it. And the credits are weighty, like you know that you've got some money in your hand. So it's kind of really a lot of fun to have those on your board and, try and manage them. So, it just adds to that. There's player and raider ships also that you are using. So the players have different ship components, and I feel like they're really well designed and are proportionate to the board size. So you might have a issue with space if you have too many ships in one spot, but overall, like, it's You can tell distinctly what each ship or raider is supposed to be. I do have a little bit of an issue initially sorting through which raiders that we're pulling out, because we have these gold standees and not the cardboard ones, which look a little bit more like the raider cards. But you can figure it out. You got to take a deep breath and take 2 seconds, and you can figure it out. So on the artwork side, for me, it just hits all the right notes. The planet colors are distinct yet subtle. They don't overwhelm the visual field. So you got this lovely space field out there. The design just kind of contributes to the immersion factor for me without feeling cluttered or distracting. It was a little bit on the, what I would say, a realistic sci-fi feel rather than a cartoony look, which just helps again with that overall immersion that you're feeling. So the high quality materials like detailed miniatures, the integrated theme, and just really makes this a stellar game that way. And I think it's a standout from all that. So Justin, you have taught this game many times and set it up many times. You want to walk us through how that goes?
Sure, yeah. So starting just to kind of talk about the rule book, I would rate the rule book pretty highly. I think it's well laid out. It does answer most of the questions that you're going to have during the game. It has a flow that makes sense, which I've pretty much adopted when I teach the game. I follow more or less the same structure of the rule book. But I would say that there's enough small details in the game that come up that you are going to probably need to be referring back to the rules on the first couple of plays. There's just some unique situations that come up, and so I think you're going to be needing to refer back for certain things. But the rule book makes it pretty easy to find that stuff and to answer the questions that you have. I will say there are a few situations that I think aren't super well covered by the rules. One that's come up a couple times for me is the situation where there's events that happen during the game that are triggered by a marker that goes around a disc, and as it progresses around, it'll get to a point where it triggers an event. So an event happens, and then different special actions will occur during the event. One thing that can happen is that event marker can be triggered while an event is being resolved. I don't think the rulebook really has a clear explanation of what's supposed to happen. Like, do you continue to advance the marker, or do you not do anything and just reset it at the end of the event? So that's one example of one of those kind of small details that isn't super clear. But like I said, by following the structure of the rulebook, I've felt I've been able to find a good flow for teaching the game and feel pretty comfortable teaching it, to just about anybody.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I haven't fully read the rule book myself, but I've had to pick up the rule book enough times while we were playing the game to find or reference a rule, so it seems pretty easy like that. And the one thing that I would note is from a aesthetic perspective, this game looks, with the deluxe version, looks gorgeous. I think it would look really good just base game. I mean, you had to punch out all the card stock for the base game anyways for the deluxe. Like, the deluxe edition is just more miniatures and component holders. It's not, if you buy the deluxe, you don't get the base game. You still have to buy the base game separately, at least in retail. So it's an interesting distinction for anyone that's considering buying this game, is if you do see the deluxe box, you don't just go grab that deluxe box, because you will not have the actual game.
I will say, from my perspective, it is a very pretty game on the table. It looks great. I was honestly not super impressed with they did make these plastic trays that are sort of supposed to replace your player board, and they I like the concept. It just didn't feel like the implementation of that particular aspect worked for me, because it's like it's supposed to replace your player board, but it doesn't have any of the information from the player board. So I kept the trays and the player board. And I mean, it was a really neat idea. It just, I felt like that one thing didn't work for me. But
I 100% agree with you on that. I loved that idea. Like, oh, you can use the tray as your player board. It doesn't work very well. And honestly, some of the components don't fit in it exactly. So I don't know if there's molding issues or whatever with the manufacturing. But yeah, I 100% agree. I think it's just best to stick to the base player board for sure. Otherwise, in terms of packaging and the other inserts, they work really well for storage. And the thing you're talking about doubles as storage for the player components, which that works well. But yeah, it's not as not that great for actually using as a player board. Agreed.
Yeah, it's the storage with this. The best thing with the storage for this is that it comes with a map that shows you how to put everything back in the box. So there's no guessing.
That's the deluxe edition.
All right,
we're talking because it does the base game does not come with an organizer.
Yeah. One other thing I wanted to just quick say about the rules and stuff. There is a good appendix that lays out like all the specifics of the cards, the different cards and the modules and how those work. And then a thing they added, which I do really like, especially for first-time players, is there is a book that describes each of the 18 or 20 factions in the game in detail and gives little strategy tips for how to use that faction. So that is a thing that is, not necessary for them to do, that I like as something they added to the rules. So
yeah, I figure since they have that appendix that has the strategy tips in it, they must have gotten some really good feedback from playtesters too, because it feels like it's written from a player's point of view. Like, here's what you want to do. And so that made me feel good that they have clearly tested this with several people that enjoyed playing it enough to give strategy feedback.
I will say, since it's buried in the appendix, it's not very, oh, hey, new player, you should go here and check this out before you play this faction.
Really?
Yes.
Oh,
it's an appendix. It's like, that's not where I would go to look for new player information, though.
It's a whole separate packet.
But it's an appendix to the rules.
I don't know. I read everything before I play, so.
Yeah, I can see where Ben's coming from on this one, because I mean, I had the advantage of, I think maybe it was Justin, because he was doing the teach, saying, hey, here's something you probably want to read. So I took the time to read through it. Maybe it was Ben, because he was sitting at the table at the time. But I mean, if somebody hadn't pointed it out to me, I would have just sat down, stared at my board and gone, all right, I guess this is what I'm playing today. So
yeah, and maybe some people like to just come in, raw and figure it out themselves. But I do try to point out that, hey, for new players, hey, look, if you want to learn about your faction, some strategy, check this out. This other book for sure. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's talk about the gameplay.
Yeah. I kind of want to break down core mechanics in terms of just how the game works without going into a ton of detail. Let Matt kind of cover some more specifics. So at its core, this is a worker placement game. You're going to have a fleet of ships that you can build that act as your workers, and you get to launch them to planets and bases and nebulas to take your actions. Once you run out of your workers, you get to bring them all back to your personal station and take some actions there. There is a dice-based combat system. So generally when you launch a ship into a location with an opponent or any kind of raiders, opposing ships, you're going to trigger a combat and roll a bunch of dice depending on the ships that you have there. And basically it comes down to the highest dice is the winner. There are 5 progress tracks you're going to advance on to earn some points. There's science, industry, supremacy, commerce, and civilization. That's one of your big key ways to score points in the game. And the main way you do that is by building what they call modules, which are like individual special action spaces you add to your station, your personal player board, that you get to trigger when you bring all your ships back from the main board. Then you can also build developments, which are structures like observatories, factories, cities that you build on planets, which will earn you some points when you place them and also at the end of the game. So those will also move you up these scoring tracks as a way to increase your point count. And then end of the game is triggered. Basically, you during game setup, you're going to select whether you're going to play a short, medium, or long game. Basically, you're just going to trigger the end of the game at someone getting 50, 60, or 70 points. When someone achieves that score, that will trigger the end game and you'll finish it out. So that's sort of a real broad overview of things. But I'll turn it over to Matt to kind of get into some more details here.
I will say, one of the things I always judge a game by, especially when we're talking about the actual flow of the turn, is what is a reference card like. And I will say, I think the reference card of this particular game is very well done. It tells you the steps you need to follow, and it breaks down the various detail. That's not to say you won't have something you need to look up. There's a lot of details to this game, but I felt like the reference card was really good. It helped me when I was just those first few turns trying to figure out the flow of what I was doing. So when you're starting your turn, it is fairly simple, like Justin kind of alluded to. You're either placing ships or you're pulling them back. I like to say that's where the simplicity ends. But the flow of the game does make a lot of sense. So the other thing that can really affect your turn is the asymmetric factions. All the factions, I would say, add to you and your turn in some way, shape, or form. They may affect your combat, or they may affect things like, hey, because I did this thing, I get extra resources. Or they may be like crazy space dwarves that just build 1,000 things. And we all go, oh my God, what the hell is he doing? But that being said, when you start, you're placing a ship. You either have to find an empty spot if you're placing, say, your first ship of all your ships, or you're going to be placing ships in range of other ships. And once that ship is down, you get to take the action on wherever you placed it. If it's just a base level planet, you might be grabbing a moon or getting resources. If there are also these other types of places that are space bases out there that you'll be able to do things like purchase modules or repair ships, or you might be able to build new ships. There's also places you can go to do trading and other things. So there's a lot of different regions you can go to take actions. And then once you're there, like I said, you've placed your ship, you're going to take those actions. Once you've done those actions, though, that's when the player interaction really starts to hit. This is when we do things with combat. So first thing we might do is say, hey, we're going to see, because there are alien factions in this game that aren't a player. There are these raiders that are roaming the board. We're going to check. Is there a raider in range? Is that raider going to come in and attack you? So that might happen. You might have I might have placed a ship somewhere where I can engage in combat. I might have picked on Justin and said, I want to go into combat with Justin. So I might have placed a ship in one of his regions, or maybe I didn't have a choice because that was the closest region I could actually go to. So combat has its own flow. The nice thing is it is very clearly spelled out on the board. You'll be able to do multiple steps, things like reinforcements. Do I have adjacent ships that can come in? And we do that in order. And then we do things like, does anybody want to play diplomacy? You have these wonderful cards that are part of the game that can enhance multiple different sections of your turn. So these might be cards to play the diplomacy. Then once everybody's determined if they're doing diplomacy, because somebody might play a card that ends the combat completely. And then let's say we actually decide we're going to have a combat. Everybody's like, diplomacy, who needs that? We're going to go ahead and have a combat. That's when we get to that dice rolling. So if you roll like me, little all over the board, sometimes it's really high, sometimes it's really low. But you're going to start by determining what's your dice pool. How many dice do you have? You can augment it through how many ships you have, the type of ships. It could be you can spend energy, get a little bit of extra punch, drive your weapons a little harder. Then you also determine what's your strength, meaning what's the minimum dice roll that you can roll. So there are ways based on how many ships you have or supporting things or cards. You might not be able to roll less than a 3. So if you roll a bunch of dice and get a bunch of 1s and 2s, you get to re-roll those till they're above a 3. So, and then at the end, everybody just kind of compares the dice, and you look at the top dice, and if only one person in the combat got a 6, no, that person wins, and everybody else loses. But the nice thing is then we look at the next die and the next die and the next die. So, it's possible, even if you only have a couple dice, that you might win. It's just a lot harder to win if somebody's in there rolling 3-4 dice. So, and then whoever wins gets the spoils from the battle. That can be sometimes special stuff you get from beating the raiders. You usually get special rewards. But if you lose, it doesn't mean that's all bad too, because while your ship is going to the scrapyard, you get a little prize. It could be something special, or it could be extra cards. Those cards are amazingly helpful. There's also numerous free actions you can take throughout the turn. Just referring to the overall pacing of the game, sometimes when you play a more complex game like this, it can feel like it takes forever till it's your turn again. I will say I never felt that with this game. This game moves fairly quickly. It keeps going. The fact that if, let's say, Justin got into the combat, if I'm the next person around him and he's fighting some raiders, I have to roll those dice for the raiders. So I'm not just sitting there doing nothing on Justin's turn. Or maybe Justin attacked me. So you keep involved even on other people's turns. It feels like you're never going, and you flow through these steps so quickly that it doesn't feel like somebody's turn takes forever. The one thing that I found is I was constantly engaged with what's going on with the state of the board. Somebody does something, pulls the raider in a different direction. That changes what I want to do next. So, when the only other type of action I mentioned was when you're pulling ships back off the board. That has its own flow. You're activating modules in this space station that you've built. You're generating energy, generating resources, maybe repairing ships, doing all sorts of other actions. I will say that's the only section of the game that I felt could drag on a little bit, and that was only later in the game, because once you've built a fairly good sized station, it can feel like, oh, you're pulling back 6 or 7 or 8 ships and you have a whole boatload of energy. Somebody might be activating stuff for a while. But overall, I felt like it has a very nice flow. It didn't feel like one of those Euros where I'm waiting through 20 minutes for my next turn. It always felt like it moved very quickly. Suzanne, you want to maybe talk a little bit about the strategy?
Yes. One of my favorite things with Andromeda's Edge, or the most interesting aspect for me, is the player interaction. So, like, when you want someone to attack you, they might not. But the other times when you lose, also, sometimes you want to lose because you're going to get some valuable consolation rewards, which was one of the strategies that I think both games I kind of had, was that as soon as I could, I slotted a moon into my losing battle space so that I could maximize my reward when I lost a battle. So that is kind of a strategy like that. So then that made the conflict a strategic tool for me rather than just what I would feel as a setback. I didn't put as much weight into rolling well, which was good because this last game, I pretty much rolled horribly, except for when I wanted to roll horribly, and then I won the battles. So, it was, it was just how it went. But that said, that the player interaction can create some frustrating moments, like when another player takes a location you're eyeing or blocks and basically blocking your launch point that you want to launch into for your next turn. Since you can't, sometimes you do need to launch where there are no ships currently, or you just don't want battle because you need your ships out on the board. So, that kind of tension just does help kind of reinforce the theme, I think, a little bit. You have this competition for resources and positioning that feels more natural rather than forced. It's not, it's you're doing it, you're exploring, you're bumping into people, making friends. One thing that I feel there is a bit of strategy that you have to be thinking about for this game. So this is not an entry-level game. This is not a, hey, I have been playing Candyland, now I want to play something more difficult. Don't jump right to this game. It does require a solid rule teach, which Justin did a great job of. So you need someone, who can either pick up the game through reading the book, watching a video, or having someone teach it to you. So as I believe Matt mentioned, that these individual turns at the base aren't overly complex, but you do have lots of triggers in there that are, hey, you need to know what's going to trigger when, in what order, and you need to kind of keep track of that to maximize what you're going to do and what impact your actions are going to have. So, it's like, it's easy to skip some steps or shoot, oh my gosh, if we had done that in the right order or a different order, I would have had a different outcome. This game, though, if you're looking for something with a little bit deeper strategy, Andromeda's Edge definitely delivers. You have asymmetric factions that help you provide a different approach to how you are going to play and what your strategy for that game is going to be. You do need to keep a balance, I found, between building, fighting, and also resource management. And that balance kind of shifts game to game depending on what other people are doing and also what your faction thrives on. Does your faction thrive on, getting some benefit from attacking or having, certain buildings out? What do they want to do? Do you need to be recalling your ships a lot? So I had a few of the key takeaways I've only played this game twice, but a few key takeaways I found is that if you can build early in the game, when there are more leaders on the board, those buildings are they're going to use up your leaders, you're going to get more points for them because there are going to be more leaders near you. So that is something I totally did not do on the first game. And my score, I kind of felt like suffered for that. I've also noticed that the pace of the game changes depending on how aggressively the other players are either building or attacking or enhancing their tech tracks, the things that will move them up on the tech tracks. So that's going to jump people ahead with points a bit and just kind of move events, more and more events out there, get you closer to that end game. But if people are taking their time and not doing as much that's going to interact with another player, it's going to go much slower, which is not bad. It's just, what strategy do you want? I've played this game at 3 and 4 players, not played it at 2 or the solo version yet, which is an expansion, I believe. I found that the game does scale fairly well with the 3 and the 4 player, but the amount of interaction on the players was pretty dramatic how it shifted. In a 4-player game, even though you start with more planets out on the board, you still seem to run into each other a lot more. You are guaranteed that you'll be having to place your ships, whether you want to fight or not fight, on an opponent's planet. In the 3-player game, I felt there's only a couple times that was the best move for me, that there was always, I could avoid it if I wanted to. So just generally with more people playing with more players, you can expect tighter competition for locations and the different objectives, but lower player counts, you're going to have a little bit more room to maneuver around and, pick up the planets that you want and kind of let your strategy play out without so much interaction on it. I mean, that's just kind of what I've, found with the strategy in my couple plays and what I've observed.
Well, I'm going to tell you about my favorite moment playing this game. And that was in my most recent play. I got to play a faction that is very near and dear to my heart. And that is the Space Dwarfs, or I mean the Weldon Forge Folk. So and their whole gimmick is building out modules on their space station and adding rewards. So I just I locked into doing that in this game, and I had this redonkulous, way more than what any probably normal game you would have for a faction in Andromeda's Edge, with modules added onto my player board, so that every time I recalled, as Matt indicated earlier, it started to become a little ridiculous because it would take forever to complete. I was probably excited because I was doing things and I was exchanging things for things and doing stuff, but everybody else is like, oh my God, it's Cone's turn again.
You had so many modules. I saw that. Oh my God.
It got a little ridiculous towards the end. I mean, he absolutely honed in on the way you're supposed to play that faction, but I probably had half the modules he did. It was unbelievable. And I don't feel like it was necessarily broken. It was really neat to see, but it was oh my God.
It also went to your comment about pacing, right, Suzanne?
Yeah.
I say yours. I mean, Suzanne, I'm sitting in the same room with her. But yeah, it went to pacing because I wasn't doing some of the things that would advance the game towards the end. Our game kept going and going and going.
Yeah, because you just kept building modules, which wasn't particularly advancing it necessarily. So
Yeah, you don't score a lot of points with the modules unless when you're
oh
recalling.
no,
unless you have a
he
lot
did
of points,
fine
but
at the
it's
end of the
still
game.
not that
I
many.
still
Trust
scored
me.
like 200 points in our game, so
Yeah, if you're building modules in a different way than the default way, then yeah, that's not going to drive the events forward. Interesting.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I mean he did fine on points at the end of the game, but
Yeah, but it just took a lot longer to get there because the Conesy and Matt's 3-player game took what
Solid
at least
hour.
almost an hour longer
Yeah.
than the
At
3-player
least an
game
hour.
Justin and I were playing, and I
But
mean,
to
I
be
don't
fair,
Mhm.
our table was the only one with 2 new players at it. I mean, you guys
Yes.
had everybody at the other table had played before, so they at least knew the flow. And myself, and we had the Stark Raving Mad one at our table as well. For us, it was brand new, so I felt like that at the beginning slowed us down a little bit because we were still trying to figure out the flow and things like that. So
Yeah, and learning how and when to drive those events is kind of a thing you pick up as you have played multiple times. Like I've learned now, okay, I want to do these couple things to actually move the event thing on purpose so that I can get the scoring card that I'm looking for, or just keep the game advancing because I'm ahead in score or something like that. So that's
Yeah.
something I had to pick up that wasn't obvious the first couple times I played. But yeah.
Justin, what about you? What was one of the things from your recent games that you've found so much
Yeah,
fun?
so one thing this game has this dice rolling combat, which is not always something you see in a Euro game. But what happens is with these combats is you can have these really surprising moments where someone just has 1 or 2 little ships in the combat, but they roll really, really well, and everybody else rolls poorly. And so, like, as everybody's rolling all their dice, you're waiting to see who the winner is going to be. The underdog comes through with an amazing dice roll, or maybe they play like some super powerful card at the end. So you get these tense, surprising moments that come out of the combat with like an underdog coming ahead, or just a big swing in the expected result of the combat, or a major victory over a gigantic raider mini or something like that. So
Oh yeah.
I really like those exciting aspects, and I don't mind the randomness when it is sort of contained to just this combat aspect. I think that works pretty well. So
Yeah.
we were hooting and hollering a little bit for some of our combats when we were playing.
Yeah, we had a few interesting ones. Sort of like in the beginning, I want to say it was either us versus the Raiders, or vice versa, or maybe one of us engaging. At the end, we did have a couple of nice 3-way battles. That was probably one of my favorites because I had used one of my bigger ships to kind of jump in on top of somebody because they just happened to be where I wanted to go. And I think we ended up with a raider in there too. And I had jumped in. I had a ton of cards. I was ready to go for bear. And then everybody else just rolled terribly because I was like ready with my cards. I'm like, I'm going to win this battle no matter what. And then everybody's like, yeah, I rolled like crap. So, but it was still a lot of fun. I mean, it's like, that's probably one of the more things I like about the combat is it is fun and it's random and it's a little bit, your odds are better, but when you have more dice, but it's still a lot of fun. So what about you, Suzanne?
So I guess mine, similar to Matt and Justin's, has to do with the combat. But this was towards the end of my last game. I really needed to lose a battle because if I lost a battle, I had a card in my hand that let me move up on one of the tech tracks, and that meant that my last turn or two in the game, I could do other things and concentrate on going up on others for endgame to get my endgame scoring better and get into another level, hopefully. And of course, that's the one time that I rolled well and won the stupid battle. And I really, really wanted to lose it. So that was probably my favorite moment, was that it was just whatever I wanted it to do, I didn't do. And it was kind of silly and fun, and just had to adjust what I was going to do.
I think it's very interesting to hear the three of you all talk about your most exciting moments in what is otherwise a fairly crunchy Euro game. all orientate around the combat mechanism, which is the chucking dice. And that's something that I don't think without a dice-based combat system that you don't get those same kind of moments at the table where people are like, ah, and celebrating. And it's what's so clever in this game and so well done is that even when you lose the combat, it's really not that, it's not punishing really at all. I mean, there's a little bit.
It's not bad.
Lose combat, I would have come out ahead of where I was at the end. My score would have been up by like 10 points, which I still would have lost, but
if you lose like all your ships in a combat in one go, that could be a little punishing, but that would then also kind of be on you for maybe overcommitting or something like that.
Right.
Like Ben said, it's not all that punishing. You get your ships back the next round, essentially. Yep. So, it's never like you're losing workers or whatever. You might lose some board positioning of where you wanted to be on the board for other actions. But
yeah.
It frees up things. So, I mean, there were times where I wanted to lose and I lost, and that was great.
Yeah.
It got me off the board. Well, because you get kind of on one end of the board and you don't want any of the resources or anything over there. So you need to get off it's just easier to have people kick you off the board than pull them back sometimes.
Yeah, there's definitely strategic reasons to lose.
Yep.
Losing is the new winning, apparently.
It is. Well, in this game, it is. And here's the other reason that it should not surprise you that the three of us enjoy the dice rolling battles is because this is WiscoDice. We love dice games here.
Do you love rolling some dice? Absolutely.
Yep.
The dice just don't like me. That's okay. But they were pretty good to me that night. I'm going to say that.
I wanted to talk about some other things that I thought kind of make this game shine that I just really enjoy, that are highlights, and let you guys have a chance too. But for me, like one of the big things is this asymmetrical factions. I love asymmetrical factions in games. I love having a special ability. You get to do something cool that's unique and different from everybody else. And there's enough factions, like you get to choose from 3 different ones at the start of the game. So you really have some options and some flexibility in how you want your game to go and to try different things. I really like the different factions. They're all pretty unique. Like I said, another, I think the battles are really a high point of the game. They can be tense, they can be surprising. And I really like the tactics card system, both just for combat and for the rest of the game. It can be very fun to just say, oh, I played a diplomacy card. I'm not going to fight this battle. I get to get some other stuff instead. Or to throw a surprise battle card and be like, actually, I have 3 6s now in this combat, so I'm going to win. And there's all kinds of other scenarios where you play these tactics cards to gain some advantage in the game that you can really find ways to maximize your turn. Another big one, the last big one for me that I'll just highlight is, again, we're talking about the deluxe version pretty much, and the upgraded Raider miniatures are a highlight for me. They're really cool miniatures and have a real nice board presence. Some of them are gigantic and maybe don't fit on the board spaces, but they really look cool and make the Raiders feel like a big threat because you just have this big imposing, space Kraken miniature hovering over all your little ships.
Oh, absolutely. I will say those are really cool. I mean, one of the as probably one of the newest player here for this game.
Yeah.
But all of you, I think, have multiple plays under your belt. A few things that I felt like didn't work so well for me, and some of this can be experienced. I like the asymmetric factions, but I didn't always feel like the factions were well balanced. That being said, I do think there's a learning curve on some of these factions, and I think if you play them multiple times, like you might latch into something that would work better the second or third time you play that faction. But there's a lot of really cool factions. I really struggled with the decision at the beginning of the game with what faction to play. For me, like I said, some of the phases towards the very end of the game can feel like dragging out. The recalling of ships in particular, especially if you have those damned space dwarves that have 1,000 things in their 1,000 modules in their space station.
Yeah.
That's probably the only complaint. That particular phase if like towards the end of the game is the only one that I felt like dragged out and didn't involve you, because when one person's trying to sort out having like a whole bunch of energy and what they're activating, that can be a little time consuming at the very end of the game. But that would be like one of my only complaints of a situation where the game slowed down. I do think the events add something, but I will say some of those ships, depending on which ones you pull, because the events are random, some of those ships, if you pull them out early, can be brutal.
Yes, absolutely.
They can be a challenge, I think, to get off the board or to just stay the hell away from them for a while. But that being said, I mean, you're on the edge of space, so by golly, you're going to be fighting something weird and difficult. So
yeah, regarding the factions, while I also do enjoy all the different factions, I have had a couple plays where it seemed like one faction had a particularly powerful ability that maybe due to inexperience, we just didn't know how to react properly to, and seemed to dominate the game. It could be down to the people I played with and just, other factors that sort of worked out in their favor. But I think there is maybe something to be said about faction balance not being perfect. I think it's a valid criticism and probably unavoidable, really, when you include 18 different unique factions.
Well, the internet has already started putting tiering lists for ranking the factions in this game. So it's clearly something the internet has also agreed with us on, is that I think there is potential for some faction imbalance here, which is, I think it's okay. I think it's probably amplified by the fact by player inexperience. So the more I think you play this game, the more you're probably able to adjust what you're doing in the game. Very similar for me in like the way I would experience, say, a game like Terra Mystica, where you have also different factions, and each of those factions have like a little bit different way that you can really maximize what you get out of them. I think that's the same thing in this game. And if you don't quite know how to maximize that faction maybe early, or do what you need to do with it early, or some of them are just a little more intuitive with the way like somebody's personal play style might be than others. And there's so many of them, it's going to take a while for you to play through enough of them before you're like, oh, hey, I know which ones I really like.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Because I felt like my faction was not out of it the whole game. I mean, not saying Ben didn't stomp us at the end, but the two of us had not played the game before, right? So I always expect I'm not going to score tremendous during the first time, because I'm still learning how the game mechanics work. I thought my particular faction worked fine. I felt like I wasn't honing in on the strategy more was the issue. It was a inexperience just trying to learn the game, then that faction's weak.
No, that faction wanted you to attack, I think, because
and the space early in the game I just
attack, and it's hard to know early game where to push or pick those battles. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's dive into our final thoughts and ratings on this game. So here at WiscoDice, we rank board games on a 1 to 10 scale, where a 1 would be like watching a supernova go off on the edge of Andromeda and the game going up in a ball of flame. Or a 10 would be like you found a newfound prosperity, all of the riches, and now the galaxy is under a newfound peace, all under your control of your faction. So I'm going to go ahead and kick this off. I'm giving it an 8. And yes, I wouldn't be surprised if I'm actually going to be playing this again this weekend. So it's definitely one that I think has caught a lot of people's eyes and heard about, and definitely will get played again and again quite a few times. Besides the fact that it was a significant financial investment to buy all of the stuff that we've bought for it.
Gotta get your money's worth out of it.
Yeah. I don't think it'll surprise anyone that I'm rating this fairly highly, as it was my game of the year of 2024. I'm putting this at an 8.5 out of 10. I really like this game. It is almost perfectly attuned to my preferences, and thematically, gameplay wise, enough randomness, enough dice, enough Euro to just hit all the things that I really like in a game. So some of that is just personal preference, really pushing this one up for me. But the things that I think, a couple things that might hold it back from getting a little bit higher is it can be a very long game. And just because of that, it means I probably won't get to play it as much because it's harder to get to the table, being a more complex and longer game. And especially for a first couple plays, I think it's going to be a long game for most people. And I would recommend sticking to that short or mid game on a first play for sure. And then maybe some of the faction imbalance that I've seen throws it off a little bit. But otherwise, I really, really like this game and highly, highly recommend it. Matt, how about you?
For me, I rate it as a solid 7. I really enjoyed the game. It was fun. I don't think it was over the top amazing for me. It's a very pretty game, but I mean, I would definitely play it again, and if it hit the table. And honestly, I think this is one of those games where if I played it a couple more times, my rating might go up more. And it's just kind of that I've only got one play under my belt, and I was like, yeah, it was a lot of fun. You know, I would definitely play it again. How about you, Suzanne?
Yeah, I'll say I enjoyed this game immensely the first time I played it, and I enjoyed it even more the second time when I felt like, hey, I can form some strategy and feel like I know what I'm doing and what impact my actions are going to have. I'm giving this game a 7.5, so a 7.5 for me, which, like, my top favorite game of all time is only at an 8.5 rating wise. I still have not found that like 100% perfect game yet. So this one, I feel like it's a rich strategic experience with a lot of like rewarding player interaction. Like, no one should feel bad with the player interaction. It's not lightweight. I like that. There is a bit of a learning curve, and you need to do things in like the correct order. And so sometimes that's a little frustrating, either remembering like, what do you need to do next? Or, hey, I triggered all these things. I got to make sure I do them in the right order because it will impact the game and overall if you don't do it that way. So that's going to take me probably another play or two before I finally have that kind of down pat. But really, the asymmetry, the meaningful choices of what you're going to be doing and always having good choices, and then the tactical competition with it, it just all makes this a good game for me. So, Justin, like, who would you suggest should play this game?
Sure. Ultimately, I think this is a game for someone who's looking for a crunchy, fairly complex Euro game and who is not bothered by player interaction and some randomness. And it helps if you really enjoy a sort of space, sci-fi, aliens, and space battles theme. Yeah, a good Euro with player interaction and a little bit of randomness is who should check this game out.
Well, I think that might be enough for our pew pew review of Andromeda's Edge. Pew 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 pew. So that covers the whole game. That gives us all of our final thoughts. But we also talked about in this episode the games we've been playing, and that included Trajan, taking ourselves back to kind of some of the original days of some of our big Euro game initial discovery. And also we talked about a new game from CGE in the form of SETI, the Search for Extra-Terrestrial Intelligence. And all of those games are awesome. So make sure if you watching or listening to this that you go ahead and give us all those stars or hearts or whatever it is on the application that you're listening to us on. And shoot us a note to let us know if you've played Andromeda's Edge, SETI, or Trajan and what you thought of them.
Thank you so much for listening. Make sure you leave a review of this show wherever your favorite place is to find podcasts. Oh, and by the way, give us a like on our Facebook page. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, or Pinterest while you're at it. If you haven't looked recently, make sure you catch up on the blog at WiscoDice.com. Hey, Brian, what's that site?
Oh, darn, I forget. Justin, what's our website again?
WiscoDice.com.
That's right, it's WiscoDice.com. And until next time, everyone, peace out.